Hello, my friends. And today, Lavrov once again showed that the war will continue despite negotiations.
The people of Crimea, Donbas, and Novorossiya expressed their will in referendums, and we will bring to completion the process of returning these historically Russian lands to their home harbor in full accordance with the aspirations of these people.
So, this is not just about Donetsk region, it's about all four regions. And that's why the war continues. And you may be surprised, but it turns out that today the armed forces of Ukraine are continuing a small counteroffensive, or what could be called limited counterattacks along different sections of the front, not only near Huliaipole. Today, the Ukrainian Armed Forces say they cleared 4 more settlements, and it appears the attacks are continuing, although officially everyone is staying quiet about it. Let's start with the direction of Pokrovske. In the Dnipropetrovsk region, Ukrainian forces reported that they liberated the villages of Orestopil and Oleksiivka. And during fighting aimed at improving our tactical position, our units managed to push the Russians back from Orestopil. We advanced south in the ravine areas, which immediately produced results. The gray zone expanded towards Stepove and Sosnivka. In effect, the Russians began to be cut off from convenient approach routes and forced to operate from less favorable positions. At the same time, we regained control of Oleksiivka. Consolidation is ongoing, careful but systematic work, without sudden rushes, focused on holding ground. Novoalexandrivka remains under Russian control for now, but the situation around it is shifting against them. Our actions are gradually creating the conditions for envelopment and flank pressure. It's also worth noting the settlement of Hai. It has also come under our control. Previously, the Russians held it tightly, keeping us back with FPV drones and artillery, essentially using it as a firing position. Now the node has been knocked out. Of the Russian hands, which immediately expanded the gray zone and disrupted their defensive logic in this sector. Overall, we see a gradual but noticeable expansion of gray zones, where the initiative is now on our side. The Russians are being squeezed, forced to retreat rather than dictate terms. The work continues, the direction remains tense. We'll see what comes next, but the overall picture is not in the Russian favor. As you can see, good news is appearing once again. In the direction of Huliaipole, there are no reports of new counterattacks so far. On the contrary, yesterday the Russians claimed they had captured the village of Zaliznichne. However, the Ukrainian side hasn't confirmed the loss of the village. We hope that clearing operations will also be carried out here, since if this village is lost, Huliaipole would be effectively lost as well. So for now, fighting continues in this area. There are also improvements in the Zaporizhzhia direction. The armed forces of Ukraine reported that they carried out clearing operations in the village of Lukyanivska and partially in Primorske. Of course, the general staff previously denied that Russian forces had captured these settlements, but in reality, we see that the Russians were present there and had even entrenched themselves. So now the Ukrainian forces are reporting counterattacks. Lukyanivska, Zaporizhzhia direction. Videos have been published which allegedly show Ukrainian soldiers within the village, as well as captured Russians who, according to available information, were taken prisoner in Lukyanivska. There is currently no reliable and unambiguous confirmation of the full liberation of the settlement, so Lukyanivska remains in the gray zone for now. There is also information about the partial clearing of Primorske. The defense forces of Ukraine carried out clearing operations and restored control over Lukyanivka and the northern part of Primorsk, Zaporizhzhia direction. In turn, the Russians are once again panicking. Earlier, they claimed that the Ukrainian Armed Forces had concentrated reserves for an offensive in the Belgorod region. And now they are saying that Ukrainian forces have gathered reserves for an offensive in the Zaporizhzhia direction. The Ukrainians continue to concentrate forces in the rear of their Orikhiv grouping. In addition to withdrawing a number of infantry units from recovery points and gradually redeploying them to the Zaporizhzhia direction, strike unmanned aerial vehicle crews continue to arrive. According to our information, there are already more than 300 of them. In addition, there has been an increase in the Ukrainian electronic warfare activity west of this direction on the Dnipropetrovsk front. After capturing the settlements of Hai and Oleksiivka, the Ukrainians began applying flank pressure on Novoalexandrivka, which is under our control. We expect more active Ukrainian actions in this sector and also anticipate parallel attempts to advance toward Huliaipole from the north. At the same time, the Ukrainians don't possess resources large enough to allow them to spend a month probing our defenses with small assault groups that tend to get exhausted while waiting for us to better prepare for their arrival. Moreover, their command believes that the shutdown of Starlink gives them a temporary advantage that must be exploited before we find a way out of the situation. We assume that if the Ukrainians decide to act, the main strikes on the Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk fronts will take place within the next 1 or 2 weeks. As you can see, the Ukrainian forces' offensive is still continuing, although for now it remains very limited. It's also important to note that last night the Russians carried out a massive strike on Zaporizhzhia. Russians struck an infrastructure facility in Zaporizhzhia, causing a large-scale fire. This was reported by the head of the Zaporizhzhia Regional Military Administration, Ivan Fedorov. According to him, it was the result of Russian drone attack. Preliminarily, no people were injured. As a result of the attack, more than 11,000 subscribers in 2 districts of the city are currently without electricity, he added. Yes, large fires were recorded there. In the Kherson direction, the Russians carried out attacks near Holapristan, but they achieved no success and there are no changes in the situation there. Now let's move to the border situation, specifically in the Sumy direction. For now, it's relatively quiet. But along the border, the Russians continue to try to break through. They want to extend the front line as much as possible, which is why they're attacking the Sumy region. So far, however, they haven't been able to secure any positions on Ukrainian territory, and the front line remains unchanged. In the Kharkiv direction, the Russians continue assaulting the village of Zelene, but the situation in Kharkiv itself is catastrophic. The city is being shelled almost daily, and a state of emergency has now been officially declared. In the Vovchansk area, the Russians continue assaults on the village of Staritsa, breaking through near Pavlivka, and fighting is ongoing on the outskirts of Vovchansk. However, as before, the front line remains unchanged. In the Kupiansk direction, the Russians are assaulting Peshane, but elsewhere there is still no significant activity. All previous attacks have been successfully repelled, and no changes along the front line have been recorded. In the Borova direction, the Russians are not conducting any new assaults, and the situation has stabilized for now. In the Lyman direction, the Russians are assaulting Stavky, breaking through near Dobropillia and attacking Novoselivka. So far, there are there have been no major breakthroughs, but Ukrainian Armed Forces fighters have repeatedly reported that the situation is on the verge of collapse. The Russians are getting closer to the city and even breaking into Lyman, but the Ukrainian Armed Forces are preventing them from securing positions. So for now, the front line remains unchanged. In the Sloviansk direction, the Russians are making very active attempts to break through to the village of Kryva Luka. They also advance toward Dronivka, and attacks are recorded in the fields toward the Rai-Oleksandrivka area. The situation here is also on the verge of disaster, as the Russians are only 6.5 kilometers away from linking the two front lines. However, over the past day, there have been no new changes. The Ukrainian forces are doing everything possible to prevent the Russians from advancing. In the Kostiantynivka direction, the Russians continue their attacks in the city, assault Ilyinka and Stepanivka, and attacks near Rusin Yar don't stop. So far, there are still no changes, as the Ukrainian forces have been able to repel all attacks. In the Dobropillia direction, the Russians are assaulting Sofiivka and Ivanivka. The situation remains difficult around the town of Bilitske. The gray zone has already formed around it. The town has been heavily damaged, and the Russians are periodically trying to advance. So there is little good news here, and the fighting continues. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians are assaulting Rodinske, breaking through toward the village of Shevchenko from two sides, and attacks on the western flank continue. Activity is high, and the gray zone is expanding significantly. The Ukrainian forces are preventing the Russians from consolidating on new positions. So for now, the red zone remains unchanged. In the Novopavlivka direction, the Russians continue their attacks in the town and are assaulting Filia. However, they have had no success, and the front line here remains unchanged. Meanwhile, as Russia continues to hit Ukraine's energy infrastructure, strikes on Russia also continue. Overnight, reports came in of hits on an oil refinery in Volgograd. And Kremlin doesn't want Russians to know the truth about what is happening, so they're actively blocking not only YouTube but also Telegram.
On my way from Stambov to your interview, I noticed huge concern among internet users due to the new restrictions on Telegram. Will the app be blocked, or will it remain an alternative for now? I see that I am reading a statement from Roskomnadzor saying that a decision has been made to slow down Telegram because the company does not comply with Russian law. It's a shame the company isn't following it, but there is a law that must be followed.
Friends, be sure to share your thoughts on this in the comments. And that's all from me. So please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all the latest news. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Bye bye.